George, there's I could take 90 minutes talking about you, but that would be a little dull for everyone else and very embarrassing
Yeah,
for you.
definitely.
But just just to know that it's always an honor whether we are sharing what we see or we are just chatting, watching football, or anything else that we're doing. So
Well, like we for me, Lynn, I feel like you really stepped up, and I just love what you're doing.
thanks. So George, about an hour ago, I did a count on how many people registered, and it was 210.
Get out of here! Wow.
210 registered, and right now we've got 102 people live right now. And it's across 32 different countries.
Really? I'm. I just. Uh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's very cool. Not as cool as your glasses, but still very cool.
Hey,
So,
hey, 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 uh, hey, Terry, can you get those other glasses that are?
Yeah, we'll bring them right in a minute.
Oh, that'd be good. All right, Win. It looks like we're ready to go here, guy.
yeah. So you and I had a chat last week, having mulled over a few times about how to run this.
Right.
And what we chatted about would be that you and I would just share notes for about an hour,
Yeah.
as if we're talking by the fireside, the
A
fireside to
fire,
your
a
left.
fire, a fireside chat.
Yeah, as I've been very lucky to have with you many times over the last 7 or 8 years. And it was interesting, because one of those chats that we had back in December of last year, when I came out to see you and Linda, and we were chatting about lots in that time. And it was really evident to me that some people would really love to listen to what we were talking about.
So
And
they'd eavesdrop.
they could eavesdrop and they'd really enjoy it. And then when we chatted about putting together a webinar on principles in business and how it relates to the corporate world, and I thought, well, why don't we combine the two so it's like a fireside chat
Yeah.
and exchange notes on what we've learned about the principles, the relevance of the principles in the corporate world, and what our role is and where to start, and all those other questions that people would find really valuable. And you know what also struck me as well in thinking about that was that you and I come from very different starting points to begin with in our lives before talking about the principles in a corporate business setting. That you came from a classical therapist background in Gestalt therapy,
Yes, that's right.
and then found yourself talking about the principles in business years after discovering the principles via Sydney Banks. And I was working in the corporate world in training, coaching, and consultancy for various different companies around the world. And I stumbled across the principles. So I was already in corporate and then bringing in the principles, and you were in principles and then taking it out to corporate.
Yeah.
And why I think that matters is that for anybody listening and watching us now, well, we can relate to the starting point from your camp and background and
Yeah.
my camp and background. So I think that's really helpful for people to know. Now, I'm going to go back to a story of you and I a day back in, I think this would have been, I don't know, maybe 2015. And on this day, you were saying to me during, about the time that you and I, well, when I started working with you, with Linda and Barbara Patterson, and you said to me as you were getting to know me, well, when you've got a really good feel for people, you're clearly doing stuff, but this is what I don't get about you. In to me, George Pransky, the principles are the best thing since sliced bread, but I don't hear you talking about them as if they are. And it was one of those,
Mm,
what? I was a bit struck by
yeah,
that. And then I reflected on it and I thought, you're right. And the reason that you're right is that I don't see them as the best thing since sliced bread.
right.
They'd made a big difference in my personal life and a part of my business in the way it working. So how I was showing up was different. But then seeing the relevance of what I'd learned for myself everywhere in the corporate world, I hadn't yet. I didn't have eyes for it. I did not see the universal relevance of it. So I just wondered, as as I say that, how do you describe the relevance of the principles to corporate world?
Well, uh, way back at way back when, uh, this guy named uh, Steve Adams uh, said to me, George, um, we're we're uh, we're in big trouble uh, and and I don't know that we're going to dig our way out of it. I said, well, Steve, I think you have to understand that I don't do business work. I don't work with businesses. He said, well, are you saying there's nothing you can do to help a business? I said, well, I, it would, I mean, I would do the same thing uh, with a business that I would do with a private client. I, I, I would just uh, talk to them about well-being, and I talk to them about where people's experience came. I mean, it's the same thing. I don't see how it would be different. And Steve said, well, so you're saying you wouldn't adapt it to a business. I said, well, no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't know how to do that. He said, okay, then that gives me, so you do it however you want to, and I'll make the best of it. So I said to Linda, well, Linda, I kind of get Steve Adams' blessings that we don't have to do anything different than we normally do. And that's what he's suggesting, and that's how we're going to do it. So Linda says to me, well, George, wait a second. There you go. Hey, thanks for it. So Linda says to me, well, George, do you really think that people are going to be interested in the business aspect of it? I said, I don't think they are going to be interested in the business implications or the business aspect. But I got Steve Adams go ahead to just be however I am and talk to people. And that's good enough for me. So essentially, I bought off that all it is going to be the same as every other train I've done, and the only difference is the people who are there will be there for all their own personal benefit. I didn't have to make any accommodation for them because it was understood that it was just a well-being seminar, and that's all I was responsible, was to conduct a well-being seminar. And I really felt confident that I could do that. You know, in other words, I was very familiar with well-being, and matter of fact, I'd spent half my life that, and that's what I was up to. Now, so we went there and we talked to people about moods, and we talked to them about how people have a natural resilience, and we talked to them about how we talked about the deeper feelings and humility and all that. So I figured, this is a piece of cake. I can do that. And the thing that you got to understand, that we just thought that we were doing exactly what we normally do. And then we said goodbye to everybody. And they said they appreciated what we did, and they thanked us profusely. You guys are great. And so that was the end of it. And we didn't think we had anything else to do with doing a business seminar. So I get a call from our CEO. And he says, and this was about maybe 3 months later, or maybe 6 months later. And he says, well, George, the seminar you did was a big hit. I said, well, that's great, Kevin. That's music to my ears. He said, but you know what stood out to people? It stood out to people that you, let me see how to say it. You appear to be discouragement proof. That's how they said it. You appear to be discouragement proof. I said, well, I don't understand. What would a person be discouraged about? They said, well, that's the thing, George. You talked as if there was no problem. before I did this seminar, there was all kinds of problems because there was people, falling off ladders and getting down and getting discouraged about their work. And, they were not happy campers. So I realized that I had a viable product here, because if I could just help people with discouragement, that would be a big service. But I didn't think I had anything to share. I thought that was going to be my product that I was going to peddle. But then it turns out that the plot thickened, and people wanted to learn more, and they couldn't believe that the seminar that I did for them had such an impact that they were figuring, well, you know what they said? They said, let me see how they said it. How they said it. Well, the stock market was on a downturn. So that they weren't, there wasn't enough business to go around. So people were getting laid off, and there was just business conditions were really bad. But one of the people said, if business continues to be bad, we're going to have it made, because our spirits are great, and we're gonna call on people, and because our spirits are so high, we know that people will be responsive, and all of a sudden we're going to have this exceptional business opportunity, because if the market continues to go down, we'll have all kinds of business. So they were, you might say they were rooting for the market to go down, because they thought that it would be so easy for them to build their business.
Wow.
And that's how I got into this business. And I should have known better. In other words, I should have known that people are going to be affected by business conditions. So the people that I knew weren't affected by business conditions, but I knew that was part of some people's reality, that they were affected by business conditions. So these people that I was talking to, one of them actually said, yeah, if business continues to be on the downturn, we're going to have it made, because they knew that they were resilient, and that there's something else that I wanted to say. So let me take a minute, because I was going to say something that I really liked, and then it slipped my mind. So I have to go back and no. But it was at that moment that I realized that there were implications for business. It wasn't just about well-being and, and you know, discouragement, and that there was, and I should have known it, because you're dealing with human beings here. Of course, there's going to be a component of people getting down in the mouth, and the whole market was down in the mouth, according to my reckoning. So the people who were resilient were in short supply. So when people uh, like, generally, the people were licking their wounds, and they were uh, drinking, taking drinking and doing all kinds of uh, you might say bad behavior.
Mm.
But that's what they did. They knew that was that they blamed the market.
And if it looks like, or if they really think that the market is what's causing me to be in a bad mood, then wow, I would be impacted by that. I would do things to medicate, such as alcohol, such as other things I would do in order to keep my spirits high as best as I can. But if I can see the separation, the difference between the outside world and how I experience life itself, then I've got that resilience within me. Then what I do is it's a totally different world.
Yeah. And the thing that stood out to me personally was that people were discouragement proof. There was no way that they could be discouraged. As a salesperson, they were totally discouraged, and as a result, they were working more because of the opportunity, and their colleagues were working less. So the colleagues were licking their wounds, and they weren't were having marital problems, and and then the other people that I knew that worked for this company uh, were bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I couldn't believe that it was that simple. When I just couldn't get it, I asked him, is that it? It's their mood goes up, and all of a sudden they have energy to do this and energy to do that. I thought it couldn't be that simple, because I thought of business as much more sophisticated than that. Because essentially, what I was seeing, that when people are down in the mouth, they have low energy. They're they're uh, they're just, their personality changes.
Mm. No,
So I knew that if we, I know this is a terrible way, if we could get uh, a product that was that helped people, independent of their mood, that generically uh, helped. So what I thought of was resilience. If people could learn resilience, they would do great in the business, in the biggest business setting.
there's a bit in that I want to go back to about when you said, I should have known that.
Yeah,
And I look back at the things that I saw for the first time and thought that too. But there's no way of shortcutting that. So you had to go through that to see it. And I've had to go through my own learnings for me to see the absolute relevance of the principles to effectively then to business results. And they're absolutely intertwined in my mind. And I'll come on to that in a moment. But here's why I think it's great for everyone listening to this right now and watching us talk is that you have to see that for you.
yeah,
That really matters because the other thing that I know you speak really highly of is that whenever we are talking about the principles is that you stick to what you know, you stick to your grounding
yeah, yeah,
and not borrow somebody else's or a good idea that you've seen in a book or a tape or a masterclass or webinar. And here's one thing that I noticed for myself from training people in traditional selling, negotiation, presentation skills, leadership, and that area and interpersonal relationships at work. I would go back months later, 3 months later, to ask them, what did you do differently because of the training?
yes,
And what was the impact of that? And I was constantly surprised before I'd even heard of Sydney Banks and the three principles, before I'd come across this, that what they were doing differently wasn't that direct to what I was training them in.
yeah,
So, as an example, they would say after a negotiation training is that, okay, all the stuff you taught me, great, but what really mattered to me was I'm not negatively impacted when the other person who's negotiating with me will be mean to me. I'm not reacting to them.
yeah,
And I'm going, I can't remember how much time I spent on that. Not much. And it was just noticeable to me that where the results were coming from was not what I was spending time on. And I thought, I've got to look at that again at some point. And that some point is now to a place where it it kind of is so obvious to me after, years of doing this work and deepening my grounding in conversations with you and other people in this community that it's behind everything.
yeah,
But I have to see that.
yeah.
I had to get curious and look for me to see the links for myself in the way that you did with resilience. And then I know that you've done a lot with state of mind, and you've talked to me about examples in the hairdressing industry
Yeah,
about
right.
tips and state of mind. Do you remember that story from, I guess,
I
in the
do.
80s? Yeah.
Yeah, they were uh, hair hairdressers. It was Supercuts was the company, and the room was filled with I think there were 250 haircutters, and they ranged. Some of them were, you know, uh, I think the oldest one was 30 or something like that. they they were they were really young. Now, when I talked to them was where well-being comes from. That was my stated topic. What accounts for some people having really good well-being, and somebody else, their well-being is no good? And I essentially talked more about the potential for happiness in everybody. Now, the one of the partners of the company, uh, you know, uh, said to me, George, I just don't understand why people were so quiet when you did your talk. You could hear a pin drop. And I said, well, Frank, uh, they were very interested in my subject, the subject of resilience and well-being. He said, I know, but you think they would have been bored. You talk so slow, and you'd think they would have been bored to death. I said, well, apparently they weren't. He says, well, that's what I don't understand. How come they were dying to hear more? And that's what I found is a common reaction. People are really wanting to hear more. They can't get enough of it.
Yeah. Now, I remember you telling me that there was a link between the tips that the individual hair dressers would make in relation to their mood or state of mind. I don't know if you remember that aspect of it. That effectively you said, well, it was amazing because the hairdressers who were in a buoyant mood would
Yeah.
always get more tips than the people who weren't. So if anyone was skeptical about what has well-being and happiness got to do with anything, well, it's got to do with how many tips you get at the end of each shift.
Oh, yeah. That's exactly right. Yeah. That was the relevance. And that's what the hairdressers, they realized that, and they commented it. They said that that particular day, their tips were above the average on that particular day, and they attributed it to the talk that I gave.
Yeah.
and the what it was uh, when it was goodwill manifesting it. That's how goodwill manifested. It manifested through tips. And it's funny because people thought their haircut was a lot better than it really was because of the tips. So they had a distorted view. And the truth be told, uh, well-being played a really strong part of that because uh, people would see their hair in uh, a, a better light, and uh, yeah, that was amazing.
Yeah.
Really, oh my God, it was so great for business because sometimes people would uh, at Supercuts, they frowned on the idea of uh, uh, picking, you know, picking out your own hair cutter because they thought that it should be that anybody that you you uh, did a did a haircut for you would be just as good as anybody else. So they didn't they frowned on the idea. But if you insisted, they would go back. They would uh, uh, comply with your suggestion if you insisted. And the number of people who insisted was pretty substantial. So that was increasing their tips, and it was increasing their overall business. And yeah, I really forgot about the fact that I worked with Supercuts, and I lost I lost sight of the fact that they were very young, and as a result, they were very impressionable. So they were all over the state of mind training that we did.
Cool.
And they talked to uh, their boyfriends about it. It was all the rage.
Great. I remember a conversation that I had while delivering a presentation skills training. And 22 years ago, when I started delivering training to companies, it was very behavioral focused and tactics. This is what to do
Yeah.
with your hands and arms and stuff, right? It was helpful, but not particularly, because in fact, what people were doing was thinking more about where are my hands and my arms as opposed to being present with an audience.
Yeah. Yeah.
But here's what I remember, and I had switched now to training that very differently back in about, I don't know, 2013, 2014. And I talked about the inside out nature of life, because that would then determine what gets in our way when we are giving a talk to a group of people is
Yeah.
that we think how we feel comes from the audience, comes from all this other stuff. And when we see the truth of that, mentally we're free. Well, one person after that, in listening to this, and she just went, this is going to change my entire life, not just how I present. And those moments just made me go, wait a minute, I have been underplaying this.
Yeah.
the impact of this and the relevance of this to business. And clearly that then has had massive ripple effects in the last 8 years. There's something else that I wanted to talk about as well, is that, and it was 4 years ago this month, you and I were running an errand down to Oak Harbor. So it's like a 40-minute drive each way. And we went there, and you had your errands to run, and I stayed in the coffee shop next door where there's the roastery, and then, you know, we chatted there for an hour and then drove back to your home. And effectively it was like a day out in April. And as opposed to us talking either in the office or in your home, we were out for the day. And our conversation was pretty much around you saying to me, well, if I was to write a book today, my book would be the ways that the biggest discriminator about business performance and people's performance in any part of their work life comes down to this understanding. And I went a little bit quiet as I'm saying, which way do I turn now, George? Am I going left or right? I was like, oh yeah, left, right. And I'm going, wait a minute, I'm just so engrossed in what you're saying. And in the next number of hours, we talked about a leader's ability to delegate. We talked about the relationship between someone in sales and the client customer. We talked about networking events. We talked about, I don't know, a raft, I think about 18 or 19 different things we counted at the end of the day. And it all came back to the one thing of understanding the nature of thought, the nature of mind, the nature of consciousness, and the discoveries of Sydney Banks. And that was, to me, a really profound day.
Yeah.
Because I went back, when I came back here to the UK and then did my work from May onwards, everything looked really different.
Yeah.
And the example that I remember you and I talking about, and then because I had some stuff going on in May, June, and July that year with a particular global client, and they'd been learning a lot over the previous 10, 15 years about the trusted advisor. And the Trusted Advisor was a book written back in, I think, in about 2002 by a guy called David H. Meister, who he, by research, identified characteristics or factors that would make a client or customer trust the supplier person.
Mm-hmm.
And to me then, in looking at that and in our conversation, probably while driving back from Oak Harbor back to Lacona, I started to see more and more that what's behind each of these four factors, because he talks about being credible, being reliable, having a lovely feeling between the two, which is he terms in the book, Trusted Advisor intimacy, and then low self-orientation, which is how much of my motives is about me. And I saw, well, everything behind all of those four characteristics that he's identified is really understanding how the mind works. That's made such a big difference in the adoption of changes to how people relate to their customers and clients, a lot more than here's the theory on these four factors that determine trust.
Yeah.
But again, going back to what I've said a few times, I had to look there. I had to do the looking. Or another way of saying it.
Yeah, say that again, Win.
I knew that being more seen as a trusted advisor mattered to my corporate client. But I had to do the looking to see the relevance and the behind the scenes of all of that stuff in that theory back to the three principles.
Yeah.
I had to do that. And I just stayed curious and stayed, without really analyzing it, but in just mulling it over and pondering. And I just saw, well, wait a minute. Where does credibility really come from? It doesn't come from a credentials deck of what my business does for clients. It doesn't come from that. I know that it bores potential new business clients to death that, and I've seen some horrifically long credentials deck. To me, what I noticed that makes the biggest difference in credibility is my presence.
Yeah.
And what gets in the way of presence for
Yeah. And you
appearing real.
You essentially draw the person into your presence.
Right. And therefore, when I am present with somebody else, my credibility is through the roof, but not from my history with anything else I've done.
Yeah.
I'm not proving myself. The feeling between me and the other person is much higher because I've not put any barriers up. My self-orientation the degree to which I'm thinking of myself is really low because I have goodwill towards this person. I only want to do right by them. And I'll share what makes sense to them given what I do and the company I work for.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a pivotal moment for me to really see, wait a minute, this really is behind everything. And the one thing that I wanted to say as well is that I don't go in saying, okay, I'm going to train you the 3 principles. I don't do that. I go in and I figure out what matters to them as a business, what matters to their people, and what gets in their way.
Mm-hmm.
And then reflect on that and see, well, what do I know about that that's going to make the biggest difference? And then go back with, okay, well, this is what I suggest that we now do. Or another way of saying it is I start with what matters most to them.
Yeah.
So they see the implications and the relevance, because when they see that, it's easy pickings. Because the one question that I posed in the introduction to this masterclass, this webinar, was really seeing the relevance of the principles to people in business and to businesses themselves. And you know, I've mentioned it at least 3 times now, but we have to see the relevance for ourselves first.
Yeah.
Yeah. And here is why, in Wynn's opinion, in my own opinion, why it really matters as well, is that the difference between when you talked about the client who worked in the advertising space, well, just do the same as you do for me as you do with the group, that'll be fine. Because that person saw the relevance for himself. What's often different in working with companies is the person receiving the training isn't the same as the person paying for it. The invoice goes to someone else. So therefore, I need to make the link to make my job easier for proposals to get through the door and for me to work with companies. I need to really help them see the relevance and the implications of what I'm doing that are linked back to their business problems, their goals, their objectives. Because then I'm at an open door as opposed to battling through the theory of the principles compared to results.
Yeah.
And I don't know what you wanted to say about that, George.
Well, I was asking myself, is there anything that I think is important other than resilience? I don't think there's anything that needs to be said except pointing to the resilience of human beings. I just think that covers it. So if you talk about, for example, you could say that moods are contagious. uh, you could say that well-being is contagious. If you take young kids, uh, their laughter is contagious. Now, the thing that the thing I had going for me, Win, is when I talked to that guy, Steve Adams, and I said to him, "Look, Steve, all I'm going to do is talk about well-being and how easy it is for someone to get into the dumps. I don't want to talk about business. I only want to talk about personal well-being. That's it." Well, as soon as he signed off on that, I felt, wow, this is going to be easy. I understand about well-being, so that should be easy to do. And fortunately, I don't have to talk about business because I don't know much about business. But then I found out that what doesn't uh, what doesn't get covered to talk about business. There's all it's uh, human beings. They're naturally social beings, and as such, uh, that's what they're up to. So uh, I didn't have to say to people, uh, "Oh, I only want to I want to talk about this," because I understood that the well-being and the principles of mind consciousness thought are uh, all you have to talk to if you're doing a business training. Everything can be wrapped in that package.
One of the big questions I promised we'd answer, and it was the most popular question that we had from the people who are here today, who are registered for this. Where do I start? That was their biggest question, the most popular question that we had back. And when you and I chatted about this last week, you said, why wouldn't they just follow their inclinations?
Yeah,
And in my mind, it's just like, yeah, I mean, that's what I would love to do. And yet, a lot of us, that doesn't seem like it's enough.
yeah,
And I was curious, in my mind, and I'm making this up, I'm making an assumption now. But what's often behind that is that we want to get it right first time.
yeah.
And we want to have all the answers and a polished product before we've done anything.
And you know what I say to that? Say to that the ultimate uh, process is successive approximations. That's how people get where they're going. They do it through successive approximations, or essentially it's a guessing game. And anybody that knows that it's a guessing game is going to be very secure. Anybody that who thinks it's not a guessing game is gonna be insecure. Because all you have to do is do successive approximations, and you'll end up where you want to end up. And that's what takes the pressure off me, is that I know if I do successive approximations, I'll end up in I'll be successful in my pursuit. I don't know if people know what I mean by successive approximations. Essentially, you're saying it's guesswork.
Well, here's how I might say it, having talked to you about it extensively, is that where to start? The answer's anywhere.
Yeah.
What's the first step? The one that you take. What's the best first step? The one that you take. There's another way of saying it is we just try stuff and move in a direction, and then it unfolds. And I remember you saying something recently in the last year or so. It's not so much trial and error, it's error and error.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. It's error and error. And that's why I use that term successive proclamations, because it's just guesswork. And human beings, they're built to do good guesswork.
So here's a question then. What makes it true that human beings are good at that?
Well, in a way, you could say that you got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Like you said, when about the starting point, you got to start somewhere, and then the guesswork begins. Now, at some point, I'll realize, oh my God, I didn't realize it. Yeah, I understand this, or I understand that. So there's a point where the light goes on.
Yeah.
But you never know where that point is and how far you are to it.
It dawns on us.
It dawns you, yeah. It dawns on us. That's why you really, if you no, I don't know what I was gonna say. I wish I did, but I had a great thing to say, but I lost it.
Shall I talk for a sec and see if that
Yeah,
comes?
sure.
Because you know that point that you said is that effectively one thing that you said was we do find one thing at a time. And, we just go from, if it's by approximation, it's by approximation as opposed to we need to get somewhere specific and we've got the pressure in our minds. And to me, the lovely thing that I've constantly underestimated is my ability to be intelligence beyond IQ in the moment.
Mm.
Or another way of saying it would be, in a conversation with somebody, there would something that would come to mind in the moment that would beat anything I could have prepared for.
Yeah.
And therefore, to me, the best of me is always showing up, as opposed to needing to know the right step
Yeah.
or needing to know the next step. So I'm just more likely, therefore, having seen enough about that to not care so much about my intellect and just do more showing up naturally without having me on my mind.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I've seen that countless times with everyone, is that the best of them is when they do their showing up without themselves on their mind, nor the result on their mind, nor the where they're
Well,
receiving.
that's a nice thing, When, because it means that open to you're opening you're open to gaining understanding. And in what you're saying, it doesn't even matter what it is you want to understand, because all roads to lead to Rome.
Now, some of the other questions that we got from people who are with us today, they were really serious about the where do I start, because I don't know anything about business and I don't know people in business. And I get a little bit like, really? You don't know anyone who works for a living? You don't know anyone who gets paid a salary or a wage? And it's just
Yeah.
like, yeah. But what we make up is that there's a right person to speak to, there's a right company to speak to. I need to have all my ducks in a row before I start. And to me, and I've said this to a few mentees in the last 6 months, is that you could do a lot worse than go and talk to 20 people, have coffee with them, and just listen.
Yeah.
And then reflect back on what have you heard about their work lives that you think what you know might help with.
Yeah.
And in those
That would be
conversations, more and more will dawn on you. Sorry, George.
yeah, that's a brilliant way to 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 do it. Absolutely.
And the cost of that is whatever 20 cappuccinos or lattes are in
Yeah.
wherever you live, or whatever other beverage suits your palate. But if all anyone did was go out, have those conversations, and stay curious and listen, they'd be set.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And here's why, because a lot of other people are saying, well, I need to go and speak to the head of HR. Well, if you know the head of HR, go there. But if you don't, it's a hard path.
It's what?
It's a hard path
Yeah.
to go and have a meeting with someone you don't know unless someone's opened the door for you.
Well, it would be less hard if you acknowledged that you were in over your head,
That's true.
because people uh you humility is a strong uh, position for people. They're, if a person has humility, and they're apologetic, that that's a step in the right direction.
I remember a meeting where I thought I was taking a big risk by saying something like that, that I was totally in over my head. And I flew out to this other country in Southern Europe on a recommendation from someone I'd done some work with when he was in a previous company. And I was then meeting the head of marketing and the head of sales. And I was listening to them because they wanted me to bring in some things into their industry because they were in, what would they call it? Complementary healthcare as a not really
Hmm.
pharmaceutical, but complementary healthcare with a pretty booming business.
Yeah.
But they wanted to get better, and they knew that I'd had packaged goods experience and was training people in packaged goods. So we need some of that stuff to our company. So that's why they wanted me to fly out and meet them. And I'm listening to them talking, and I don't understand anything about what they want. And I'm going, I don't get this. I don't get this. I don't get this. I don't get this. And I felt a bit like a broken record that I kept saying it. And I said, I'm hearing your words, but there's some reason. Maybe, maybe I didn't sleep great overnight, having flown in last night. But I'm still not clear on what you say you want your people to think about, do differently, the relationships um, with their customers. I'm still not sure. And I'm not only am I not sure, I'm more confused than I was before I got on the plane. Right
Hmm.
now, in my mind, I'm going. This seems like a really big risk to say, right? But it was true, and I knew I was in over my head. I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't think that they knew what they were doing either. Now, the good news was is that they went, oh, okay, let's go back to basics. My
Yeah.
heart was going about saying that, but it was absolutely the right call.
Yeah. And and essentially, you were getting yourself off the hook
Yeah,
by saying,
yeah. Because I think a few years earlier, I'd have gone in there, not being humble, not being that way, thinking I was on the hook, trying to get credibility from somewhere. And I'd have been trying to impress as opposed to trying to understand.
yeah,
So I think that's one way of saying what you're pointing at, George, but correct me if I'm wrong.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, we've got about 15 minutes left. Are you okay if we open up to see if there are any questions that we've not
Oh,
answered?
that'd be great. I'd
Yep.
love to answer questions.
All
Yeah.
right. So I'm going to open up the chat in here, and then well, you can actually ask me directly. So you can chat with me. So if there's any questions that we've not answered yet, then please type them into chat. And wave furious at me if you can't do that. Okay, so thank you, Melanie, for this one. So it just shows that the chat has been re-enabled. So Melanie says businesses tend to look for tools and structure and exercises. How do you approach that in your teaching?
Well, the easy answer is I don't approach it. I I don't uh, I don't have a lot of respect for uh, techniques and such. I really feel like if you're heartfelt, you're not going to need any techniques. So, in a way, I'm saying that heartfelt is the ultimate technique.
So let's say then, let's say I'm your main contact and I'm a little bit persistent on tools, techniques, and exercises and structure. How would you
Yeah.
convince me?
Well, I would tell you that there are certain inclinations that you have, that human beings have. And if you followed your inclinations, they would take you to the promised land. So I'm essentially saying that you're you you know uh, you know things, and the things that you know, you could you might call, you might say that, let me see how to say it. Gee, I just don't know how to answer that. When
Well, can I say what I heard,
Yeah,
but
sure.
using my words instead? You would help me see that there's a better way than having tools and structure. You would help me notice that, wait a minute, Win, that, you at your best, you're not always going into your toolkit. Or if you are, what makes you decide in real time to go into that tool from the
Yeah,
toolkit? Because that's not a list of a structure thing that you've got on a post-it note on your forehead. What is driving your innate intelligence for the good stuff to come to the fore? That's one thing that I might say, given
yeah.
what you've just said. But I don't know if that's what you meant.
See, you know what it is, when is I feel like the ultimate technique is being yourself. I think that everybody, that's what they want. If they get insecure, they turn to techniques. But if they don't get insecure, they they just are themselves.
See, that's something that I know the majority of managers and leaders totally underappreciate.
Yeah.
So, an example would be a leader will have either had a say in who gets hired in their team, or will have inherited a team that they work together.
Right.
If you don't trust them, in my opinion, you've got no right being a manager or a leader. If you don't
That's
trust people, it's like, well, you're in the wrong game. And anyone, and again, I've had to see this for me personally before then noticing in other people, that when they are themselves, that is the best of them.
Yeah.
The insecurity is, as you've said, is gone, or again, another way of saying insecurity is the need to impress, the need to have a tool ready that I was trained 3 months ago or 3 years ago or 30 years ago. That doesn't make any sense when I'm just myself and being present.
You know, one time I did uh, a um, a training where I was uh, teaching people public speaking, and and I I was teaching people public speaking, and one of the people said, uh, it, it, he we were developing people, and he said, well, no, Georgia, I don't understand, you know, I, I don't understand you where you're coming from, because oh no, oh, oh no, I I lost my train, my train of thought. Yeah, I had a good example, but I lost it. I lost it all of a sudden. So I apologize for that. I sometimes I have things in my mind and I can't get them across so good.
Which is the same for every single person here.
Yeah,
That would be true for everyone. But here's what I notice about you. It doesn't affect you. So here's an example, okay? If I was giving a talk and all of a sudden I lost my train of thought, I'd stay embarrassed for a really long time.
yeah,
Now, I a lot less than I would have done. I'd have been in pieces 15 years ago, 20 years ago. I'd need a mop to pick me up as a blob from the floor. But now I find me losing a train of thought more humorous than embarrassing.
yeah,
If I feel embarrassed, I get over it.
yeah, yeah.
So a couple of other questions. There's one here that I really thought was interesting because I know you and I have talked about this one over the
Yeah.
years as well. And it was around proposals. So Kathy asks, how do I create a proposal for a company's board of directors to approve?
Well, when I know this isn't a very good answer, but I don't think you want to create proposals.
So what do you do instead?
What you do instead is you say to the person, look, I want to have a conversation with you. And if at the end of the conversation, maybe I'll create a proposal.
So one thing I
Because
remember, sorry, George, go on.
because uh, the proposal is going to be at best guesswork. And if you talk to have a heart to heart conversation with the person, there's a lot of things that you'll it'll be no longer be guesswork. You take the guesswork of it. Now, frankly, I wouldn't volunteer to to do a proposal if I didn't base it on the understanding of the person I was talking with.
Yeah.
So if they said to me, "Well, Georgia, I wanted you to do a proposal," uh, and then after you do the proposal, we'll we'll get together. Now, frankly, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do that.
One thing I remember you saying, and it wasn't just to me, I think it was to a group, and then I've talked to you about it since, is that this is your words if I remember. So excuse me if I get it wrong, George. I wouldn't do a proposal unless I know it will be agreed to.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So it's not a blind pitch. It is based upon I know this works. I know their budgets. I know their timings. I know it's already been pre-agreed before I even give this to them or send it over.
This is true. That's true. Uh, and that's why, because because I'm uh, writing the proposal, and I can write it however I want. I know that it's going to be it's going to be informed, and I wouldn't do a proposal unless I had a leg up on the fact that it was informed.
There's a
I,
few more here. Sorry, George, is there more you want to say on that?
no,
Or
no.
move on. Okay. Um, I probably got time for one more, but one thing I will say, and you can carry on typing these in, is that I will do my best and I'll get some input for George to answer these and get them emailed out to you as well, or I'll do a quick video on these. Um, there was one here that I really intrigued me. This is from Tom. Do you specifically talk about mind, consciousness, and thought, or is it more about mood, resilience, well-being, etc.? How would you answer that?
I don't talk about uh, mind, conscious, and thought, because uh, I will end up talking about it, but I won't start out, because I think it's a stretch for people. So I would, like I said, I talk about resilience, I talk about using your own intelligence and this and that. But I don't, I would end up talking about mind and conscious. But I don't start there. So I think people just have trouble
Yeah.
with the terms. You know?
You asked me a few months ago, so you've got this retreat coming up, Win. What do you do on these executive retreats? And I said to you, well, the first evening, what I'll do with my co host, we will listen to what they want and why they came.
Yeah.
We'll reflect on it, and then we'll start there and go as far upstream as we can get. That
Yeah.
doesn't lose them. We don't lose them that way.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't start by saying, as I remember a friend of mine saying once, hey, do you know you don't exist? I wouldn't start there,
Yeah. Yeah.
because that's a little bit, what do you mean? Right. But
Yeah. Yeah.
meet them where they're at first, and
That's
then
it.
we'll see where we go. And it's really nice and upstream kind of direction to go, to then get to the nature of thought and the characteristics of it, the nature of mind, the nature of who we really are. But there's ways of that being a very gentle yet more impactful way than start with, let me tell you about what I know.
Yeah. Yeah. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I love, when I reference the outdoor
Outdoor
company,
advertising.
and uh, and I said, listen, I don't know when I'm gonna I don't know what I have to offer them. It may be nothing, but I want to be true to myself, and I want to you know be educational as I can be, and that took me off the hook. So that's the first order of business, is I wanted to be off the hook. So I wanted to be seen as an ordinary person. So that's what being off the hook meant to me is I could just get off by being an ordinary person. So I didn't have to be a big shot, or I didn't have to have all the answers. I thought it lowered it leveled the playing field as soon as I was capable of being just an ordinary person.
Cool. There's a nice one here. This is from Anna. I feel what we are sometimes innocently doing is still looking for techniques. What I hear is be yourself and show up.
Yeah,
Somehow we are still asking how, and that really matters in my mind. The last bit is that when we are thinking about how, where, then we're in our heads as opposed to out there and in the world of playing and following our inclinations. And
yeah,
for
and
me,
I'll tell you something. When you know, uh, if you think in terms of techniques, you're putting pressure on yourself. So there's something to be said that you don't have. You want to don't want to put pressure on yourself, because it'd be best if you just show up as you. And that gets you out from the pressure.
I think that's just a lovely thing to remember. It's not just what we'd love people to get from our coaching and training, but it also goes for us in every aspect of what we do. Whether
Yes.
we are going to follow our inclinations and get curious about in business or elevate whatever it is that we are doing. But the whole be ourselves and show up is it. There's nothing
Yeah.
better, nothing more sophisticated than that. And it's a lovely thing, I think, to wrap today up with, George.
Because you don't have to be. Uh, let me see how to say it. Uh, I I just can't say it right. I'm sorry. I had something something that I wanted to say, and I didn't. I missed the occasion. You don't have to rehearse to be yourself. That's what I was thinking.
Lovely. Don't have to rehearse to be yourself, nor plan to be yourself
Yeah.
tomorrow. It's just a nice thing to remember. George, there's a lot of love coming across for you on the chat here. This is it's really nice, and I'll forward these on to Terry so you can read the questions and the comments.
Well, listen, I feel privileged when that you had me do this and speak uh, here. I love doing it, and I thought it was a real privilege giving me the opportunity to do that.
Well, it's totally mutual. Always an honor to spend time with you and to share. So, my love to Linda, love to you and the team there as well, under Greypaw, who I saw coming down the stairs. And I'll see you soon. See you in a few months.
Okay.
Take care. And thanks to everyone else as well. Um,
Yeah. Really.
I'm going to email out when this will be replayed, especially if you're in New Zealand and Australia and you're kind of like, how do I stay awake on this, or wherever you are in the
Yeah.
world.
Really.
Yeah, so you've done well there to be up at 5 a.m. Some of you I know, and for some of you, various different points of the day. And any questions, just get in touch. I'm going to unmute everyone so you can
Thanks, Ian and George. That was really awesome. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you
Thank
so much,
you.
Win and
Oh,
George.
you're
Thank
welcome.
you.
So lovely.
That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very, very, very much.
Bye.
Makes it all so easy. Thank
Wow.
you.
Thank you
you
very
so
much.
much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
There's an
Love
awful,
to you and Linda. and
there's an
to Win.
awful lot of feeling.
We
Thank you
love
so
you. We
much,
love you, George.
Win and George.
Yeah, we love you,
Yeah,
George.
Awesome.
really special. Thank you.
Bye.